the clouds should darken you, they turn your hopes on high. Sorrow isn't meant to shake you from your way of life. Just keep on looking for the answer to it all. Take a vision of a new day in your heart. Different hands may cross the desert of your everyday. Your mind can blow away the fears that always will be there. If you can look beyond and unless you will find a new day in your heart. That belongs to know the way and make it their own. True and sincerity will be their only hope. Look to the star and find a reason to believe with the vision of a new day in your heart. Happiness is where you are and what you want to be. If you love, you're sure to find the rainbow of your dreams. Tomorrow's fuller than 1,000 yesterdays, with the vision of a new day in your heart. With the vision of a new day in your heart.
Yeehaw!
La 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 la. La 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 la.
Yeehaw! All right, Brobs, we're back with Radical Spirits by Anne Braude. Spiritualism and Women's Rights in 19th Century America. This is the second edition. I don't know how it differs from the first, but maybe there's some updates. We will resume on page 19. Inside the seance room. First, I will open this chat so I can get 10, 12-year-olds to say, what are you reading? Is this the Bible? You gotta love it. Inside the seance room. Let me turn on the light here. There we go. Inside the seance room. Within months of the Rochester rappings, thousands of Americans across the northern states and eastern seaboard sat around their parlor tables to see whether they might not witness manifestations similar to those occurring in the presence of the Fox sisters. Fueled by rumor, curiosity, and persistent hunger for contact with the dead, spiritualism spread like a prairie fire, unhindered by the need for special facilities or trained emissaries. News of the raps aroused interest outside Rochester even before the first public demonstration. Elijah Capron claimed that Auburn, New York, where Margaret Fox lived briefly with her brother, housed 100 mediums by the summer of 1850. Cincinnati heard its first raps in September in the presence of the clairvoyant Mrs. G.B. Bushnell, who had visited Rochester over the summer and witnessed manifestations at the Fox home. By 1852, a spiritualist in Woodstock, Vermont, reported the existence of 8 or 10 good mediums and 50 partially developed. Anyone might be a medium, and the only way to find out who could communicate with spirits was to try and see. There is a very great excitement in regard to the rappings. There is scarcely anything else to be thought of, wrote the sister of a Baptist elder when their raps arrived in Shasberry, Vermont. She sent her brother simple instructions for investigation that he or anyone could follow. Now, if you would like to try and see if there's anything in it, you and Mother and Linus just sit around the stand or table and lay your hands down flat on it and let them remain a few minutes. Then say if there are any spirits in the room, will they please raise the stand? And if it does not move the first time, wait a few minutes, then ask again. You can try to satisfy yourself if you wish. I don't know, as if it would be wrong. She inquired of the raps for mediums and learned that her brother, his son, and mother, as well as a female neighbor, were all mediums. So you can form a team among yourselves. Beyond such sisterly advice, detailed instructions for the formation of circles soon appeared in print. Most advised a maximum of 12 investigators, equally divided between men and women, seated close together around the table, hands either joined or laid on the table. See plate 4. I won't. They stressed the necessity of harmony among the circles participants and encouraged the use of means calculated to promote a harmonious calmness and concert of feeling. One set of instructions recommended opening with serene silence, meditation, interior prayer, and the singing of appropriate hymns in order to obtain good and lofty communications. Advised another, it is positively essential that our thoughts and attentions be also good and elevated. Many circles opened with singing to generate unity and equanimity of feeling among those present. In 1853, in obedience to spirit authors, a Philadelphia circle published a volume of songs for use in spirit circles, received through a medium who had never written poetry and had been repeatedly surprised at the ease and rapidity with which she now receives it. To the tune of a familiar hymn, spirit circles sang, "Angel Mother, thou art near me, thou dost comfort, soothe, and bless. Thou dost ever watch and cheer me with a mother's tenderness," among other inspired lyrics. From November 1850 to March 1851, publisher and phrenologist Charlotte Fowler Wells kept a detailed transcript of seances at which her brother Edward Fowler served as medium. Josiah Warren visited the circle to inquire whether the communicating spirits approved the conduct of his communitarian settlement, Utopia, and whether the spirit would communicate with him at Utopia. Horace Greeley visited the circle and published the transcript of the 15 December seance in the New York Tribune to refute the common assumption that nothing is ever communicated from the spirit world. That is of the slightest importance. Boston abolitionist editor Leroy Sunderland remarked on the rapid spread of spiritualism. He recalled that when he first proposed the Spiritualist periodical in 1850, there was not one family known throughout the New England states where responses from the spiritual world had been made to questions put by mortals. Manifestations had occurred, including musical manifestations produced through his daughter, Margaretta Sunderland Cooper, but no questions had been answered, except for those in the presence of the Foxes and a few other New York families. Sunderland reported that by mid-1851, the movement's opponents acknowledged the existence of 1,000 mediums witnessed in every state. Determined Americans sat in spirit circles. It's a book on radical spirits, spiritualism, and women's rights in 19th century America. It's a book about communicating with the dead. Determined Americans sat in spirit circles even when manifestations were not easily forthcoming. The first circle, formed in Philadelphia, met twice a week for 4 months without response. Finally, in February 1851, sounds were heard that the circle attributed to spirits. Yeah. A few days later, one of the circle's members, a physician, was attending a young woman whom he described as a very sensitive, clairvoyant, and magnetic subject. Her family informed the doctor that they had heard mysterious noises around the patient's bed, and that his brother's spirit had promised the medium he would rap that morning. The promised raps occurred, and the young patient produced manifestations that many Philadelphians found convincing. This news inspired the formation of other circles for weekly investigation, all of which enjoyed faster success than the first. Within a year, the city's 6 ongoing circles decided to organize a Harmonio Benevolent Association in accordance with instructions given by the spirits. The society met to hear lectures by its members and to read communications received in the circles. That summer, the society rented a hall for Sunday lectures by spiritualists and mediums. Weekly Sunday lectures continued in Philadelphia for decades. Most people initially investigated spiritualism at home or in the homes of friends or neighbors, with untrained and unpaid girls or women acting as mediums. The experience of Ohio abolitionist Joseph Baker was typical. On a winter evening in 1852, he visited the home of his friends, the Collinsons, to meet a 12-year-old girl who played with their children and had a reputation for being a medium. Barker described himself as exceedingly wistful. Did I say Baker the first time? Barker described himself as exceedingly wishful to witness some proof of the spirit rapping theory, but as having little or no hope that such proof would be forthcoming. According to Barker, the appearance of the girl was that of perfect simplicity and ease bordering on carelessness. Indifference or unconsciousness, it would be impossible to imagine anything more unlike fraud or deceit. After dinner, Barker, his friends, and another visiting reformer sat around a table with the young medium. She placed her right hand on the table and sat turned half away from the table. Spirit coming through my voice. Her left hand resting in her lap. "Is there a spirit present that will communicate with me?" asked Mr. Collinson. 3 raps indicated an affirmative response. Collinson, who had the alphabet written out before him on a sheet of paper, asked if the spirit would spell its name. 3 more raps followed. He moved his pencil slowly over the paper before him, pausing briefly on each letter of the alphabet. When his pencil rested on D, 3 raps sounded, followed by raps at O, R, and A to spell Dora, the name of the Collinsons' 2-year-old daughter, who had died a few months before. In response to her parents' questions, Dora reported on her happy play life in heaven and her contact with other dead relatives, including her 20-year-old cousin, Mary Ann, who had been her nurse. Dora announced the mediumship of 2 of her surviving sisters, implying that the family could hold further seances without going beyond its own ranks for a medium. The Barker family, however, contained no medium, so they would continue to rely on the daughters of their friends for communications. Mary Ann reported that Dora had teachers in heaven, although she had not yet learned to read, and that she loved her parents and saw them often. Joseph Barker was an English Methodist who had lost his faith and now gave lectures against the divine origins of the Bible. He described the feelings with which he sat down at the seance table. "My longing after immortality is intense. My longing for sensible, demonstrative, irresistible evidence of a future life and of a spirit world is intense." The Collinsons were English Mormons who had left England in order to join the Mormon settlement at Salt Lake. Mary Ann died in Kansas just as the family was about to start across the plains to Utah. Her spirit expressed approval of the family's decision to change its course and settle in Ohio instead of pressing on to Salt Lake. The Collinsons took the opportunity of the seance to inquire whether Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, was a true prophet, whether the Book of Mormon was a divine revelation, and whether polygamy was a correct principle. To all these questions, the spirit of cousin Mary Ann rapped in the negative. Barker, however, received support for the religious path on which he had embarked. His brother's spirit rapped affirmatively when asked if he approved Barker's course in leaving Methodism, yeah, and lecturing against the divine origins of the Bible. All this wisdom came through the mediumship of a 12-year-old girl. As in Rochester, Americans throughout the country found messages from spirits most plausible when delivered through the agency of adolescent girls. Mediums appeared most frequently among the younger female members of families. A student at a girls' school in Ohio reported that there were 16 mediums among her classmates in 1852, including herself. Leroy Sunderland, the first to call public attention to spiritualism in New England, held frequent circles in his home after learning about the Rochester rappings in 1848. He met with no success until he called for raps in the presence of his daughter, Margaretta, who was rocking her baby in a cradle. She soon developed into a musical medium, inspired to play and sing by the spirits. Mediumship was closely identified with femininity. The popular spiritualist writer Cora Wilburn heralded the advent of spirit communication in the persuasive accents of inspired woman's tongue. Not all mediums were women. Not all mediums were women, but the association of mediumship with femininity was so strong that it was not dispelled by the contravening evidence of the existence of male mediums. The medium may be man or woman or man, but in either case, the characteristics will be feminine, negative, and passive, said a longtime spiritualist leader. Spiritualists use the language of electricity, also current in mesmerism. Said hi, buddy. To describe women were negative and men were positive, said a longtime spiritualist. Spiritualists used the language of electricity, also current in mesmerism and phrenology, to describe the relative positions of men and women in spirit communication. Women were negative and men were positive. Circles should be composed of equal numbers of men and women, or of persons in whom, respectively, the positive and negative elements predominate. Experts agreed that some males are comparatively feminine or negative, as indicated by a lack of masculinity of organism and of force of character, while some females are comparatively masculine or positive, as evinced by the possession of these characteristics. In order to facilitate the mission of electrical currents that spirits are making me cough. The spirits used to manifest their presence, circles should seat men and women, or positives and negatives, alternately in a circle. The most positive and most negative persons occupying opposite positions in the circle. By most negative is here meant Jesus Christ. By most negative is here meant, what clunky writing. By most negative is here meant the one who is most susceptible to spiritual influences, or the most of a medium. And I'm going to sneeze. All right, let's see if I can get on with this without coughing or sneezing. Such advice, it cleared my nose. Such advice closely equated femininity and mediumship, but also allowed the exceptions based on the characteristics of the individual. By identifying mediumship with characteristics believed to be inherent in women, spiritualists echoed the language of the larger culture, which identified the qualities of piety with the qualities of femininity. Thank you. Spiritualism also reflected the Victorian view that the home was the true locus of religiosity. Referring to the Fox sisters, one spiritualist wrote that not in the church, not in the capital, but in the family came the first demonstrable recognition of immortal life and immortal love, the holiest truth to the holiest place. Spiritualists secured the place of religion well within women's sphere by relocating religious practice from the church to the home. Spirit circles gathered around parlor tables, a most appropriate place for women to preside. Charles Beecher claimed it is not in its published literature, its periodicals, its lectures, and its public mediums that the strength of the movement lies. It is in the family, in its family or home circles. The Plain Guide to Spiritualism advised that during the long evenings, as friends and families gather around the social board, no enjoyment can become more genial and benign than that of seeking communion with those who have passed on to the land of eternal spring and perennial summer. The ritual of the seance perfectly suited the domestic environment. It required no participants beyond the family, no facilities beyond the home. The introduction of the planchette facilitated the mediumship of untrained family members within the home. A heart-shaped piece of wood mounted on 3 casters, the planchette was believed to respond to magnetic forces passing through the bodies of those who placed their fingers on it, thus communicating messages from spirits. It could be used either with a copy of the alphabet on which it would point to letters to spell out communications, or with a pencil inserted into a hole in its back so that a spirit could use the planchette to write. It was easy to use, required no experience or expertise, and could lead to the discovery or encouragement of mediumship in unsuspecting investigators. Although not commercially mass-produced in the United States until the 1860s, planchettes imported from France were available in spiritualist bookstores by the late 1850s. The line between parlor game and religious inquiry blurred when families who tried the spirits in fun discovered mediums in their midst whose messages prompted serious investigation. For those unable to investigate spiritualism, within their own families, professional mediums offered a variety of services ranging from public seances to clairvoyant medical examinations. A wealthy manufacturer engaged Kate Fox to give free sittings for the public in 1855. The Boston spiritualist newspaper, The Banner of Light, sponsored a public free circle at its offices and published the communications received there in its pages each week. Mrs. J.H. Conant exercised her mediumship at the Banner Free Circle from its inception in 1857 until her death in 1875. Subscribers contributed to the support of free circles. Mediums advertised in the Banner and in other spiritualist newspapers. Investigators determined to witness convincing manifestations might go from medium to medium until they found satisfaction. The scope of the movement. Unfortunately, any attempt to estimate the numerical scope of the movement is rendered questionable at best by spiritualists' aversion to organization. The faith required no affiliation of any kind of its adherents or even of its leaders and mediums. While spiritualists often organized at the local level, they staunchly opposed national organization or anything that would make a census of the group possible. Spiritualists formed a denomination whose affiliates could be counted only after the movement was on the decline in the 1890s. The 1890 census reported 45,000 spiritualists in 39 states and territories, but this included only those formerly affiliated with an organized society. Estimates of the number of spiritualists by contemporary observers ranged from a few 100,000 to 11 million out of a total population of 25 million. Enthusiastic supporters and alarmed detractors proposed inflated figures, all equally without basis. Unlike most religious groups, spiritualists avoided institutional form and frequently influenced people of other denominational affiliations. An estimate of the number of spiritualists would vary and greatly depending on whether one included only regular practitioners of spirit communication or persons who expressed interest in investigation. Many believers base their faith on a single seance at which convincing communications occurred, while other individuals investigated for decades without success. In any case, spiritualism's influence was hardly limited to adherents. It received serious investigation from churchgoers and scientists, as well as from infidels and mystics, and provoked ire and ridicule from committed skeptics and unsympathetic newspapermen, as well as from Orthodox clergy. One observer counted spiritualism high among certain dangerous tendencies in American life and estimated that perhaps a majority of the members of evangelical Protestant churches in this country have at some time consulted the spirits of dead people by the help of some professional ghost seer or medium. Medium historian Emma Harding wondered whether the movement benefited more from the zealous of its admirers or the bitter persecution of its antagonists, as the latter sometimes generated more publicity. Spiritualists did not join organizations, but they did read and write. Because the movement shunned the kind of structures that in other American denominations served to foster cohesion and spread information, it relied heavily on the public press. Books and periodicals helped fill the gap left by the lack of organization. Spiritualist publications linked isolated believers across America, providing a vehicle for communication and solidarity for those who shared a belief that, although widespread, could be extremely unpopular in a locality with only a few adherents. Because the leading mediums and advocates of the movement were itinerant, and their movements were unpredictable, they could be followed only through the centralized information provided by newspapers. By the end of the century, over 100 periodicals had reported news of spiritual manifestations and the movement they began. Though many had small circulations and short lives, between 20 and 30 years in print, in most years between the movement's beginning at the end of the 1840s and its decline in the 1890s. The American Bookseller's Guide of 1871 advised its readers that the sale of spiritualist books is as steady as of books in any other department of the trade, and they should not be overlooked by the bookseller, reporting that spiritualist publications accounted for the sale of 50,000 books and 50,000 pamphlets every year. Hardly a major novelist of the period could resist spiritualism's dramatic possibilities, and many a minor writer exploited its popularity. While Henry James, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and William Dean Howells expressed varying degrees of distaste for the new movement. They gave graphic portrayals of its practitioners in The Bostonians, The Blithedale Romance, and The Undiscovered Country. Respectively, Jo March, scribbling heroine of Louisa May Alcott's Little Women, lamented that her first novel was accused of spiritualistic ideas even though she had none. Harriet Beecher Stowe, one of the best-selling authors of the 19th century, urged her publisher to send a review copy of her book, Old Town Folks, to the Banner of Light. That paper commands an immense circulation and influence, she wrote, and a notice of the spiritualistic features of the book in it would ensure a sale of many copies. The publisher took her advice. Early converts included individuals whose prominence made the manifestations difficult to dismiss as fraud perpetrated on the credulous. Every notable progressive family of the 19th century had its advocate of spiritualism, some of them more than one. Anna Blackwell, eldest and most radical sibling of pioneer doctors Elizabeth and Emily, and abolitionists Henry and Sam, adopted spiritualism by 1850 and became a vociferous, lifelong advocate. The ubiquitous Beecher family contributed Charles Beecher and Isabel Beecher Hooker to the ranks, while Harriet Beecher Stowe became a serious investigator. The Baptist missionary dynasty fathered by Adoniram Judson gave its youngest member, Abby Ann Judson. As already noted, abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison was an early convert and remained loyal to the movement until his death. The famous Grimke sisters, Sarah and Angelina, talked to spirits. The conversion of New York State Supreme Court Judge John Edmonds in 1851 increased the movement's credibility. Edmonds resigned his position on the bench to become a full-time advocate and medium. The New York Tribune printed the pro-spiritualist correspondence of U.S. Senator N.P. Talmadge with the poet Sarah Helen Whitman, former fiancée of Edgar Allan Poe. These officials were joined by Ohio Congressman Joshua Giddings. In 1854, 13,000 people signed a petition asking the U.S. Senate to appoint a scientific committee to investigate spirit communication. The petition received enough support to reach the floor of the Senate, but not enough to prevent it from being ridiculed once it arrived there. Mary Todd Lincoln spoke with her dead son, Willie, and brought mediums into the White House, where they conducted seances for senators and cabinet members. Although the new faith had some prestigious adherents, spirits were no respecters of class. The movement enjoyed support among both rural poor and urban laborers. Lydia Marie Child wrote in 1862 that spiritualism is undermining the authority of the Bible in the minds of what are called the common people faster than all other causes put together. Anthony, or another observer, thought it drew converts from the larger class of low intellectual character who still believe in savage thoughts, omens, dreams, and signs. The recent work of John Butler suggests that there may indeed have been a substratum of non-Christian folk practice among Americans of both European and African descent that connected spiritualism with either occult beliefs. Intellectuals like Child and fellow abolitionist Thomas Wentworth Higginson constantly tried to distinguish their own beliefs from those of the mass of spiritualists who flocked to witness sensational demonstrations. This larger, less literate group left fewer accounts of their experiences than elite investigators did. The printed sources on spiritualism, like most printed sources, derive mainly from the educated middle and upper class adherents. But the halted prose of the letters, preserved in the personal and professional correspondence of medium Axa Sprague, shows that setting pen to paper was an unusual event for many adherents, even among local leaders. Some writers even associated the abrogation of literary and religious conventions. I hope you will excuse my writing and my spelling, for this is the first letter I ever wrote to a woman in my life, and I've never wanted or never went to school but a few days of my life, and I think but little of forms and ceremonies. Oh, she spelled it wrong. Wrote one correspondent. Americans of English Protestant descent dominated spiritualism in the North, but others also participated. I'm really reading awful. Two Jews became well-known advocates, Cora Wilburn and Louis Schlesinger, or is it Louis? A sizable community of French-speaking spiritualists, probably immigrants from Canada, founded a church in Wisconsin and published their own hymnal. German-speaking spiritualists held circles in Waukesha County, Wisconsin, and in Wheeling, West Virginia during the 1850s and were served by the weekly Telefrund. Does that say Telefrund? Tafelrund. Spiritualish Blatter für Fortschritt and Reform. Fortschritt. I'm not German, all right. Published in Washington, D.C. from 1870 to 1872. Spiritualism found a natural resonance with African religious beliefs introduced by the slave population in the South. Mediumship and spirit possession existed in many of the cultures from which slaves came. The West African view that ancestors have a role in the social structure and continue to merit the obligations of kinship after death predated similar beliefs among American spiritualists. The belief that the dead can return to their living in visitations that are not necessarily ill-intended or dangerous persisted among African Americans both in the rural South and in large cities to which they migrated following Reconstruction. Blacks did not identify themselves as spiritualists in large numbers until the 20th century, but they did contribute individual mediums to 19th-century spiritualism and probably introduced ideas sympathetic to spiritualism into the white population in the South. Unlike their co-religionists of European descent, African American Protestants did not base their faith on regularized doctrines produced by a trained clergy and dependent on written text. As a result, and because of their loyalty to their ancestors, they may have drawn the line of orthodoxy so as to include spiritualism more frequently than did white Protestants, who generally placed it outside the limits of acceptable Christian belief. Black churches in Washington, D.C. welcomed the white medium Cora Hatch in their pulpits, something no white evangelical church ever did. Some white spiritualists recognized doctrines similar to their own in African American religion. A spiritualist lieutenant in the Union Army reported on mediumship among contraband slaves, including a Methodist exhorter from Mississippi. He concluded that the Negro character was intuitive, inspirational, religious, and altogether mediumistic, implying that blacks shared with women the characteristics that made them susceptible. In the North, African American Shaker leaders Rebecca Jackson and Rebecca Perot trained themselves as mediums and attended seances regularly in Philadelphia. Mr. Anderson, a colored gentleman of Battle Creek, participated in a Michigan Spiritualist convention in 1866. Black historian and abolitionist William Cooper Nell met the Fox sisters at the Post's home in Rochester and became an avid convert. The movement claimed Sojourner Truth as a convert in old age. And the person wrote, "Whoa!" Whoever owned the book before me. Spiritualism's association with abolition generated substantial antagonism in the movement among Southerners of European descent. Nevertheless, believers willing to brave the rancor of their neighbors appeared in small numbers throughout the region. The Banner of Light claimed subscribers in every state and territory and received correspondence from throughout the country. Spiritualism flourished in New Orleans, which contributed 2 national leaders to the movement. One New Orleans observer commented that spiritualism has made much more rapid progress among the Creole and Catholic portions of our population than the Protestant. First, because most of them have more time for investigation than the rushing, hurrying, money-making American. And secondly, the creed of the Catholic Church does not deny the possibility of spirit communion. Ex-Catholic French-speaking spiritualists in New Orleans produced 2 periodicals, Spiritualist de la Nouvelle Orleans, Echo Mensuel, and Le Salut, Salvation. Memphis had a number of circles by the mid-1850s, and a series of spiritualist periodicals appeared in Tennessee during the 1870s. Circles abounded in Macon, Georgia, where a Universalist newspaperman published the Christian Spiritualist circa 1860. A second spiritualist newspaper appeared in Georgia in the 1880s. In general, Southern spiritualists identified themselves as Christians more consistently than did Northern spiritualists. They tended to focus on communication with the dead while ignoring both the reform agenda and the heterodox theology that many believed such communication implied. A Methodist minister organized the leading seance circle in Memphis, which used a pious young lady from the Baptist church as its medium. Some white evangelicals in the South who had more contact with African Americans than did their northern counterparts shared the view of their black co-religionists that spirit communication was compatible with Christian belief. Gertrude Thomas, a well-educated Georgia Methodist who became a suffragist, found attending seances compatible with a vibrant Methodism. The Southern Baptist Publication Society published Mary Dana Schindler's sympathetic account of investigation in A Southerner Among the Spirits. As in the North, Southern spiritualism attracted a few intellectuals who felt dissatisfied by the sectarianism of the churches, including the writer William Gilmore Simms. Spiritualism's association with abolition may have limited its appeal among slaveholders to urban professionals whose livelihood did not depend on slavery. Civil War diarist Mary Chestnut reported that her doctor in Columbia, South Carolina, adopted the new faith. Thomas More Fort, a lawyer and educator in Minden, Louisiana, during the 1850s, cherished a spiritualist volume entitled Epic of the Starry Heaven and passed it down to his descendants. In all regions, mediums themselves hailed from varied class backgrounds, and mediumship sometimes served as a vehicle of upward mobility. Once mediumship showed a potential for profit, fraudulent mediums imposed themselves on the public, and some indeed profited from deception. But for every charlatan, that is, thousands of earnest investigators sought communication with spirits, many through unpaid mediums in their own homes. Profit or the desire for profit did not in itself prove deception. One early believer privately opined that the spirits would not have selected his wife as a medium unless some good should come out of it, by which he meant pecuniary good. The historical significance of spiritualism lies less in the few outstanding sensationalists than in the masses of faithful followers who made it a popular movement. Interpretations of spiritualism that dismiss hordes of truth seekers as benighted kooks ignore the sincere longings that attracted people to the movement and fail to locate spiritualism within the context of the cosmological alternatives available in the mid 19th century. Woohoo! There's the end of chapter 1. These pages are kind of long. All right, that's all, bruv. We done. How long is the second chapter? Don't know. Don't care. All right, that's all. Goodbye.